Hi, I'm Arthur. And when it comes to 40k, there is a very pervasive question that has more or less been ground into the fan base since its inception. Well, that's not entirely correct. It's been ground into the people who view the fan base rather than actually the fan base itself. So what do I mean? Simple. Where do you even start? The biggest strength of Warhammer 40k is also its biggest weakness. It's such a weird thing. There is so much lore, so many books, and so many different factions to choose from that it's genuinely difficult for people to even get involved if they wanted to, or at least know where to start. From a lore perspective, a tabletop perspective, and from more or less any perspective, it's all just a lot to parse through. So what is the simplest and easiest way for you to get started in Warhammer 40k in the modern day? It's easier than you'd expect, to be honest, but it still requires a bit of digging. The best way, in my opinion, is to get into the tabletop wargame first, because you don't need to know the lore in order to move some miniatures on the table. It's not like you're going to need to know the history behind chess in order to play it, you understand what I mean? So finding a faction to play and finding out what you want to do with an army is probably the best first step. Once you find an army, then you should be able to look up more about them from wikis, learn from content creators like me about the faction, and so on. This video is going to basically be a guide to determine what is the best kind of starting army for someone who knows absolutely nothing. So if you're not that person, this is all probably going to be not news to you, but hey, stick around for the ride, it might be funny. So starting off, you have to acknowledge that there are many options to choose from. I'm going to be going off of what I think is going to be the best in terms of longevity and hobby health, and the best in terms of just ease of use, while also letting you play what you want. See, that's the benefit of the tabletop. Essentially, there are infinite combinations of armies and ideas to match any playstyle or aesthetic. I tend towards making themed armies, like I'm never gonna run Raptors with assault squads, the same way I'm never gonna run Black Templars with librarians, even if it's legal in the rules. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is a bit of a topic that I tend to discuss with my local community quite often, actually. And there is a constant debate as to what is the best way to pick an army. I will always say that the best option before I even get into the technicals is that you pick an army that will always look cool to you on the tabletop, and never, ever, fucking ever pick an army because it has good rules. Rules will always change, and if you're gonna invest that much money into the game aspect of it, only to then have the rules of what faction you are playing change and you are no longer able to play them however you want, you're going to basically just have a dead army that you've sunken hundreds of dollars into to play and just not have fun with and not even enjoy the way they look on the table. So always go with what you think looks best on the tabletop first and foremost. Game rules will change, but the miniatures will always stay the same. Death Guard are 100% not a fun army to play right now in 40k. They took away the entire identity from the prior editions as a defensive army and kind of threw the whole army out of whack because of it, which I think is kind of shitty, but I will always identify with the army, as they are probably one of my favorite armies aesthetically. I will never stop playing or painting them because I genuinely love how they look. Same with all my armies, to be completely honest. I tend to pick based off of aesthetics a lot, and I find I am usually very heavily rewarded for it. Because I like a faction, it doesn't mean I get disappointed and hyper invested in the competitiveness of it, you dig? Let's start being a bit more specific. Say you just love every single faction in the game and you don't have any one that skews more to your liking, and you don't know where to start from there. I tend to say your first army because yes, go fuck yourself, you're going to get more than one. It's part of the contract when you play this fucking accursed game. You will at some point pick a second fucking army and or maybe even a third army. But how do you choose your first? It's easier than you think. Basically, try to pick an army that allows you to experience every aspect of the game relatively easily. Why do I say this? Because once you know how each section of the game flows, you can make better choices as to how you want to continue playing. Basically making your second army your favorite army. So Tau are off this list because if you're playing the Tau as they are intended to be played, they don't often move that much, don't have much melee yet, and don't have any psychic shit. Now, psychic shit in 10th edition isn't necessarily that big of a deal right now, as psychers kinda took a hit and are now just basically normal-ass units that conduct themselves the same as they did before. As the psychic phase has been removed, but in future editions, it might be good to keep in mind that having a psychic presence on the board is a good idea. So not just how we're going to be kicked out, any army that is super skewed and is missing mechanics from the rest of the game is not really good at you learning the game and being just beginner friendly. Because I think it's best to experience the game as a whole rather than pick and choose, just so you can find out what you actually like and what you don't. So skew things like Necrons that don't have psychic shit, Tau, Knights, and some of the Godsworn, like World Eaters, who just don't have shooting or psychic, are just off the lists. I'd also say demons are also gone too, aside from Tzeentch, as Tzeentch has shooting, melee, and ranged. So factions that don't give you a full look at the mechanical depth of the game are not the best choice, but if you are hard-pressed and genuinely just want to do demons, then fucking go for it, dude. Because demons are fun and pretty simple, if I'm being honest. So what next? Well, you have to kinda sift through the factions and find ones that don't slant too much in any direction. Yeah, orcs do have shooting, melee, and psychic shit, but they don't really hit that often with range. And they only have a few Psyker models, so that's kind of what I mean. Alongside that, you have stuff like the Grey Knights, which they do shoot, they do have good melee, but their main bread and butter is psychic spam. So I'm just gonna cut out the majority of the factions and basically just cut to my main point, that the first faction you should probably choose is just a Space Marine chapter of some sort. Which chapter should you choose is the next and honestly one of the more difficult questions. If you're looking to get into the 40k fandom, then making your own chapter might not be the best option unless you're particularly inspired and this isn't your first time round. Picking from pre-made chapters is a great way to get interested and invested in certain aspects of the lore. Like if I had to start over from scratch again, I'd probably make an Iron Snake's army based around their weird command structure, but I digress. The chapter you choose shouldn't be too skewed in any direction because some of the factions do have a lot more of a specialized build than others. But generally speaking, all Space Marine options are safe. You build the army out however you see fit, and a lot of them have a theme to them already built in, so it gives you a better idea of how to build the army. So picking from the main chapters is usually the safest bet, and there's a degree of reasoning behind this. So if you pick, say, the Ultramarines, which is probably the easiest faction to get into, period, and understand, you can actually just build any of the major units in the game with access to a few extra models for named characters. You are never going to be excluded from anything from bikers to psychers to shooters to devastators to what have you. Same shit with like the Imperial Fists, Raven Guard, Blood Angels are a little bit on the fence, but they do give you a lot in exchange for being a little bit more specialized towards melee. With all these options, I'd honestly say the Ultramarines, Imperial Fists, Salamanders, or Raven Guard, or a successor of any of these, is probably the best option for you to start playing with. So pick a color scheme you like from one of the thousands of chapters that are out there, and then just go on from that. Another benefit to playing Space Marines is they have an abundance of models, a long list of lore to pull from, and you always are going to be supported for these factions going forwards. Say you're playing something like Eldar. Eldar have gotten drip-fed maybe 5 new models in the last 20 years, excluding shit that's just basically an update. So if you're playing Space Marines, you're getting at least like a couple new units a year, so you always have something there. But if I had to make a secondary recommendation, I'd probably say something like the Death Watch. See, with every other faction in the game, there's a degree of sameness, especially with Space Marines. What do I mean? Well, you're going to play, say, Imperial Fists. You have to put a tactical squad in them. Tactical squads, 10 tactical Marines, specialist with an assault weapon, specialist with a heavy weapon, and a sergeant. With the Death Watch, you run Death Watch veteran squads, which are very heavily kitted out. They can have multiple different variations of models in the units to the point where, genuinely, they have some of the most choice in terms of Space Marine units out there. You can run basically mixed squads of Devastators, Tactical Marines, Assault Marines. Everything gets to be kind of put in there. And alongside that, they also allow specialist stuff like Psychers, they allow specialist captains called Watchmasters, and they have a decent amount of specialist weapons. They do specialize in killing specifically aliens and get a lot of bonuses for that, but do remember that, like, It doesn't matter what the thing is. If you point a frag cannon on it and pull the trigger until the magazine runs dry and you're left with a glassy crater, then you're probably not going to double check to see if the vaguely purple thing you shot at was either a Dark Elder or a Slaneshi Demonette. With all that in mind, you have yourself a decent guide as to where to go, but after you get into your first army, what is a good book or book series to start with? Well, I would say start reading the Uriel Venture series up to the end of the first trilogy, which is book 3, Dead Sky, Black Sun, though be careful, that one is a pretty graphic read. But once you get past that, branch out into other things like the Dark Imperium, the Dawn of Fire series, and once you find factions you want to know more about, look up books about them and dig in. But also, alongside that, just look up stuff online. YouTube is filled with content creators. Also, hi, I am content creator. You could probably learn a lot from my videos as well. These are all just my advice. The way I formatted this video is basically if I was talking to myself before I knew anything about 40k and wanted to get into the hobby as a whole. Alongside that, obviously it goes without saying, but this is in fact my opinion and is not applicable to all people. So if you want to fucking go and play orcs or you want to go play Tyranids, then go for it. More power to you. What do you think is the best faction to start playing as in 40k? I was thinking about mentioning Tyranids, but Tyranids are a weird balancing act as a faction, and they have a lot of miniatures to choose from that don't immediately give you an idea of what they do. But I'm just curious what everybody else has to say on the matter of how to get into 40k as a fandom, as a community, or just as a hobby. So make sure to comment down below what you think. Alongside that, make sure to like and subscribe as it helps the channel immensely. Special thanks to my channel members for supporting me, and if you want to support me as well as gain access to additional content, then become a channel member today. Thanks again for watching, and until next time.